Are we ready to rock and roll?
I think we are.
Do you have your whiskey ready?
I have red wine.
Okay. Well, I have coffee. Sorry.
It's 4:00, right? So on a Friday.
4:00 on a Friday, because you're in Denmark, you can say such a thing.
Indeed.
And actually, I should be able to say such a thing in Spain as well.
You would think.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are plenty out there that are doing that. But I'm running a podcast. That's heavy machinery.
It is indeed, especially with a new computer.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the easy part.
Yeah, let's see about that.
Yeah, well, I hope I make this trip easy for you. Welcome to Beyond Leadership, adopting a coaching mindset. In this series, our conversations aren't about biography or polished advice. They're about how decisions are made in the real world when the pressure is on. We'll anchor on one situation where the path wasn't obvious and explore what goes on in the mind of a leader when confronted with real trade-offs, imperfect information, and the need to move anyway. This podcast is brought to you by Peer Plaza. Human help, instantly. Martin Clausen is a father of two and husband of one. A surf skier, kayaker, a serious reader, and a lawyer by training. He has served as General Counsel at Maersk Line and MHI Vestas Offshore Wind, and today he is co-CEO of the legal tech startup HyperContracts. But I want to go back to a much earlier moment, the first time he had to fire someone. He was young, inexperienced, and the person sitting across from him was a seasoned professional. I'm interested in how he thought through that decision when his authority was real, but his confidence may not have been so real. I don't know, was it real? Did you have plenty of confidence?
Not as much as I would have had today, obviously. But I felt at the time, and that's something we can get back to, that it was a well-considered, perhaps too well-considered decision. And so that gave me a certain measure of confidence. And
I stop right there. How could it be too well-considered decisions? Are you saying
because it took too long?
Yeah.
It took too long. So that's I was trying to be funny on my own behalf, but it was too well considered in the sense that I should have probably, and that's a point in itself, that I should have gotten to that conclusion much quicker.
If only we all had the foresight 20 years ago that we have now. The thing is, foresight is an improvable skill. It grows from reflection, curiosity, pattern recognition, and the willingness to pause before life forces the lesson on us. Sounds like the recipe for wisdom, doesn't it? Yeah, today it's hire slow, fire fast, right?
Mm-hmm, right. And it wasn't like that, at least for me, and it wasn't also not in the culture of the company I was working for at that time at all that way back then.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it was a company, Maersk.
In case you didn't catch that, Martin says Maersk. 20 years ago, that name carried a very particular weight in Denmark and around the world, not just regarding its shipping and petroleum business success, but discipline, loyalty, hierarchy, and a way of leading where directness was not considered rude. It was considered normal and effective.
It was extremely hard to get into the company, but if you did get in, it was a place you stayed for life, basically. It was not an uncommon thing to see people celebrating their 30th anniversary or 40th or 50th for that matter. And if you start sailing at the age of 16, which was not uncommon back then, you can easily get to 50 years. I still have a lot of veneration for the company, but it's much more like any other big international company these days.
There are pros and cons to that, right?
For sure. For sure. And it also requires a company who is capable of utilizing that type of resources correctly and has a certain respect for that level of experience, but also maybe being prepared to tolerate other sort of slight downsides by having an older workforce. But it's also going to be an absolutely essential skill going forward. You cannot have a company where you're not capable of utilizing employees that are more than 50 years old. It's not going to work. Unless AI takes over everything, of course, but that's a different ballgame.
You say unless AI takes over everything.
Well, you're saying when.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like people saying, if I die, no.
No.
You will die.
Exactly.
Martin is talking about the future skill of using experience well, not replacing it with whatever tool happens to be newest. AI may change the work, maybe radically, but leadership will still have to answer the same human question. What do we do with judgment, loyalty, maturity, and people who have seen a few storms before?
If you had chosen not to fire that individual, what do you think you would have had to tolerate?
There's a bit of a backstory to that exact how we ended up in that situation. It might be enlightening, and it's not going to be like a career tale at all. But I was a fairly new manager at that point, and I had come into this position as part of a consolidation of legal resources throughout the organization. So it was a fairly newly formed unit. And it wasn't my idea to form it. It was another employee who became part of the department that had sort of pushed management for this consolidation. And this person had seen herself as the future leader of the group we formed. To her great dismay, I was chosen as the manager of that department, being the youngest and perhaps also the most marginal part of the group, because I came from the IT side of the organization, which, as you know, is always on the outskirts of an organization. And in this case, it was a separate company, actually, for a while. So that was the kind of environment I was operating in.
That line is doing a lot of work. Martin was young, technically qualified, and still culturally on the edge of the room, suddenly managing people with more history, more status, and more traditional authority than he had. He had the title, but the room had not fully granted him the authority yet.
And this person came from a different part of the organization, and it was my senior by quite a few years, both in experience and age.
Martin was not just younger. He was younger in a culture that respected time served, hierarchy, and the quiet authority that comes from having been around. So before he could solve the performance problem, he first had to survive the legitimacy problem.
But one of the major reasons for this person's dismissal was, I wouldn't call it direct insubordination, but it was an unwillingness to accept my leadership of the department, basically. That was expressed in many different ways, from sort of small, subtle hints in the day-to-day to just outright going around doing his own thing for a majority of his time, not prioritizing according to the guidelines that I gave him, and so on and so forth. So there was more or less obvious defiance of my leadership, which of course was completely undermining for morale and so on.
Sure.
There were other factors, but that was a main factor.
I know myself that there have been times when I wanted to release somebody from my own company and chose to coach them instead, and also chose to listen harder to what they were saying to me,
sure,
and ultimately decided not to fire that person. And I'm just wondering, now you're longer in the tooth, you have more experience.
Right.
Do you think that today you're a better coach and can save people's jobs a little bit better in that respect?
There might be situations where, based on experience, I would be able to do something in certain situations that I wouldn't be capable of back then. That's a perfectly valid point. It wouldn't have made any difference in this case. I'm absolutely certain, even with the benefit of hindsight, even if I view this very critically, this person was part of the problem was an unwillingness, a complete unwillingness to change his ways in any way, shape, or form. So I would probably describe this person as uncoachable by anybody.
That is a hard sentence for me as a coach to hear. But most leaders and coaches eventually meet someone like that. Someone where more patience, more empathy, and more clever questions do not change the basic fact that they have already decided not to move.
And it also that, in my mind, I couldn't say for sure, but in my mind, it was also based in a fundamental lack of respect for me because of me being his junior, me actually not being a lawyer, as you said in your intro, because I'm not a lawyer.
My bad. Though I think most of us would hear General Counsel and probably assume that Martin was a lawyer. So now the age issue has a second layer. He was younger, newer, and carrying a title that some people in the room may not have felt he had properly earned.
We have two different law degrees, if you will, in Denmark, and one is commercial law, which does not qualify you to become a lawyer, but qualifies you to be like an in-house counsel, and that's what I am. So that was also completely destructive for his respect that I was in fact not a lawyer and he was. And it was also quite a unique setup. It was the first time, and I think it might be the only time in sort of Danish corporate history that a non-lawyer has been the general counsel of a major organization managing actual lawyers.
So Martin had the general counsel role, but not the traditional credential people expected to sit behind it. In Maersk's hierarchy-conscious culture, that kind of technicality can become a very big stick for someone who already does not want to follow you.
Besides the fact that I was much younger and came from a marginal place in the organization, all of that I think contributed to this situation.
Looking at it from his side, do you have some empathy, some understanding for him?
I have a lot of empathy because he had a lot of history with the organization. He had been on a long journey with the organization. He had done excellent work. He had helped that business unit that he had been lawyering for, if you will, achieve quite amazing results. And he was clear that he was also sort of primed from way earlier to not be able to sort of respect this situation. I don't think he actually had a real choice. I don't think he had a fundamental choice at that point to change his ways. I think he was too set, and it was. I don't think anything could really have been done, and I'm not sure that I would consider him, responsible completely for that.
That's a generous sentence. Martin is saying the behavior had to be dealt with, but he can still see the person inside the behavior. By the time someone becomes that fixed in a system, it is rarely one person's failure alone.
So I had a lot of empathy, and I think that also was part of me delaying the decision as long as I did, which I probably, in hindsight, shouldn't have. Because what happened was, the thing that happens almost always was that the rest of the department said, "What do we leave?" I mean, this is what we needed. We needed to move on, but this was not sustainable. So that, in my experience, is almost always what happens. Not that people come running and say, "That's horrible. You should have never dismissed this person." They always say, "Oh, thank God that this finally happened."
So even if he was a great contributor to the organization, people around him were just tired of his disobedience.
They saw exactly, because he wasn't shy about it. They saw exactly what was going on, and also saw that was intolerable. So
what happened to him?
He moved on. I think he was on a break for a while, and then he got another job, and I think he was quite happy. We didn't speak afterwards at all, but I think for a number of years he was quite happy. Very unfortunately, he actually passed away a few years back, much too young, which was very sad. But he did get another job and moved on, thankfully.
Yeah. What do you think was the most difficult thing you had to say to him in letting him go?
I think it's actually just, what you say when you sit down and say, we've had, some back and forth for a while now about your position here, and we've talked about what needed to change and so on. But I don't see it happening, and unfortunately, therefore, we have to let you go. I think that just those simple things that you practice in your head for days before something like that happens, and just getting those words across for the first time was actually the most difficult.
Do you think the person who's being fired understands the emotional stress? Not that they need to necessarily be empathetic to it, but do you think they can have that vision?
Only if they've tried it themselves. I don't see how. I couldn't get into that space if I hadn't done it myself. And I don't expect any kind of sympathy from a person being dismissed in that situation. I always expect them to get very angry and so on, and I'm just happy when it doesn't happen. And I'm prepared to take a bucket load of abuse in that situation. And unfortunately, I've never had it happen to some sort of a real extent. But I understand it happens, and I think I would sympathize with it, and I prepare to tolerate it if it does happen.
Now, you're a co-CEO. Are you always in agreement with your co-CEO when it comes to firing people?
We haven't had to face that situation in our startup, so it's not
it's a startup.
Issue. No, yeah. So we are actually just the two of us at the moment. So, but we are not always in agreement in general. We also have different approaches to what we do. I have a commercial legal background, and he has a deeply technical and commercial background. So we represent different skill sets.
What do you think you'll do if that challenge arises?
That's a good question. It's actually an interesting challenge to be co-CEOs in that setup. We haven't actually discussed what would happen, because it's theoretical at this point in time. But I actually think you would be well served the moment you have employees to actually discuss that, because it's such a fundamental thing. And especially for smaller companies, it's a make or break thing, right? Having or retaining or dismissing the right or the wrong employee is something that could kill the company. So it's fundamental. I would hope that we could make a consensus-based approach work, but it's also kind of dangerous not to have a formal tiebreaker rule if it happens. But it's a good question, and I would hope that we would put it into our owners' agreement prior to ever being faced with that challenge. As a good corporate counsel, I would probably advise that you do so. Right.
Well, sorry to say this, but lawyers are the worst at their own contracts with in their own companies. I have a situation right now where these two partners, they're both co-owners, they still don't have an agreement between them for the company, and they're both lawyers.
It's absolutely par for the course. To have that situation, it's the worst. We have a saying in Denmark. I think there's a parallel one in most languages about the shoemaker's children always do not have any shoes, right? It's
say that in Danish for us.
Skomagerens børn er altid skoløse. Normally it's just abbreviated as skomagerens børn, and then everybody knows what comes after it, right?
Exactly.
Martin only has to say, the shoemaker's children, and every Dane knows where the sentence is going. Which is precisely the point. Lawyers are excellent at telling other people to get their agreements in order, and somehow their own partnership agreement is still sitting in the drawer marked later. By the way, this saying, of course, is not just Danish. The shoemaker's children are apparently barefoot in English, German, French, Dutch, and Italian, while Spanish and Portuguese move the problem over to the blacksmith's house.
So when you said that you waited too long, how long was that?
Depends on when you sort of see the process starting, but I think it must have been 8 or 9 months. I was actually thinking about that before. It's because I didn't want to prep too hard because of your sort of very sensible instructions about not prepared answers. But I think it was on that scale.
Yeah, that's a while.
It is, especially when it's that blatant and that obvious. And being in a new department and having to make that gel and so on. Other people left the department, but on much quieter terms. The lady that I mentioned that saw herself as the head of the department left on her own accord within a couple of months. And that was an amicable thing. She had her ambitions and her way of viewing things and left it. And another founding employee, if you will, left a little bit later, also on good terms, but
And today, how is your hiring process different? Or hiring and firing?
It's not that different, because one of the things that I actually learned from the company, from Maersk, was that you have to be extremely careful about who you hire. I'm very deliberate about it and have been all the way since. We haven't hired for our present company yet, but if I look back to the other positions, being very deliberate about it, really making an effort to understand who's sitting across from you. I'm a believer in testing, not as a religion, but as an invaluable tool that you can question and that you can use, not as to dictate anything, but to inform your decision. I'm a believer in cases, in using cases to present to prospects and ask them what they think about, not to get to a specific answer, but to get an insight into their process, how they think, not what they think, so to speak. So that I took away with me as an invaluable lesson, that you have to be extremely careful, even if you're quicker to dismiss people, because it's such an expensive decision to get wrong for everybody concerned.
Ever wish you could just talk to someone who's been where you are? Not a chatbot, not ChatGPT or Gemini. A real human who gets it. That's Peer Plaza. Human help. Instantly. Whether you need a career coach, a leadership mentor, or someone to help you navigate a tough transition, Peer Plaza connects you with vetted professionals ready to help right now. Browse profiles, watch intro videos, and book a session. Just like that. Visit peerplaza.com, because the best advice still comes from real people. A bad hire is expensive for the company, of course, but also for the person hired into the wrong role, the team carrying the mismatch, and the manager pretending the problem is smaller than it is.
And I have a deep skepticism towards companies who outsource large parts of their hiring process to outsiders. I don't understand what kind of company you are if you cannot figure out how to hire your own employees, to be frank. I think it's an application of responsibility, and it's a core skill that a company needs to possess.
Martin calls hiring a core skill, and I think he's right. You can get help, you can get input, you can even get a nice-looking shortlist from the outside, but deciding who belongs inside the company is too important to outsource completely. Especially
now. I mean, it's life-threatening to get it wrong. I wouldn't have anybody else involved in that decision. I might take some input from somebody. But you could imagine having some agency picking maybe if you're looking for expertise in a new field, you don't have experience, you could get some candidates in, but I would not outsource the hiring, interviewing process to anybody, irrespective of size. I consider it like a core skill of a company to be able to do that yourself.
Looking back at the situation that you were in, is there something that you can put your finger on that you might have done differently?
I'll think about whether or not I early on communicated what the essentials of the problem was clearly enough, or maybe if I pussyfooted a little bit around, if I was maybe a little bit too soft-spoken in the beginning of the process, where I could have gone directly to clarity because what was happening was so clear. I'm not sure it would have made a difference, but it could have been maybe more, I wouldn't call it more honest, but more clear, I think.
How would you have communicated that to a senior leader and still have gotten that clarity across?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Calling it out for exactly what it is and backing it up with some very specific examples. Like when you walk into a meeting like that and say like that and that and that, that is a clear defiance of what I've told the organization to prioritize. Or I ask you to do this, this and this. You did that, that and that in that order. That doesn't follow what your instructions were. And it's not because I have absolute need to dictate what you do, but this aligns with the company's priorities. What you did does not. Making it clear that this is not about me wanting to be a dictator, but about our organization doing the right thing.
Just thinking, when we're coaching employees, most of the time we're asking questions rather than telling them what to do. Yeah. And I'm wondering, can you come up with the same idea, but in question form?
Sure. I mean, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't do it in that form, but it's a fair question. The question might be, what was your understanding of our agreement regarding this particular thing, these priorities? What did you understand to be the agreement that we struck?
So what's the difference between asking a question like that and telling him?
Of course, it is. You're forcing some kind of reflection on behalf of the person you're talking to, right? And it becomes very hard to talk around that question, and you are perhaps also inviting some kind of ownership of the situation that you wouldn't when you were just talking to people. I believe in that kind of communication too. In some instances, I do think the more direct approach is correct if you want to have absolute clarity around what is going on. But of course, in an initial phase of things, when you also have certain belief that things might change, the more asking approach that you are advocating or asking me to reflect on is the right thing to do.
I've just noticed a trend, actually opposing trends of companies that want to be more direct and say that people should be very direct. And then there's the more coaching perspective of asking questions. And there's a feeling of when you're being direct that you're getting things done quicker. This is totally unacceptable, and you're going to have to figure out another method of communicating. You know, that's the direct method. And asking them a question requires more work. Right? I mean, you have to really think about the kind of question you want to ask without boxing them in. Right. But I think, there are
certain questions that are just a masquerade, right? Where it's not actually inviting any kind of reflection or any wiggle room in where it could go and so on. And those are just fake, and people see right through that kind of question. And that's even worse than talking directly to people, actually.
It is. I agree with you. If it can't come from the heart, right? If you can't muster it from the heart, right, then it comes off as complete. If you're not on the side of the person that you're trying to help, right, then it's undermining the whole communication. So that doesn't work either. But where we can find a space and where it does feel right to us, it's probably actually a quicker way to deal with problems, even if it feels like that it requires a lot more time and skill.
And I think also there's a general, if you're in a situation where you can do that, there's a greater likelihood that the solution to the problem sticks than something that is resolved just by by saying this is how it's going to be. Yeah, but it's an interesting question, and it's worth reflecting over. I think also maybe my approach back then was also dictated by the direct approach being completely integral to Maersk as a company. I mean, anything like this more questioning approach, more coaching approach was frowned upon, and we looked upon more companies that would be considered sort of more progressive with a certain level of disdain. And it has to do also with the industry that Maersk is in, the shipping industry. You don't have a debating culture on board a vessel, right? For very obvious reasons. And because it's dangerous to have a debating culture on board a vessel. And that kind of leadership style permeated the company. And it attracted the company, attracted people who not only could tolerate that way of communicating, but also thrived in it, who actually preferred not having like debates in that sense around these things and the questioning approach, but I'm perfectly fine by giving a direct order also in a very commanding tone. It doesn't bother me because I know where it's coming from. And I'm not saying that's the be all and end all of everything, but there's a reason why I perhaps also to this day tend towards that way of communicating.
Martin is not just talking about personal style, but about a company where directness was part of the operating system. If you grew up professionally in that environment, a clear order does not feel harsh. It feels efficient, familiar, even respectful. I think there is a generational piece here too. Many young employees have grown up in workplaces that prize psychological safety, inclusion, and careful language, all of which matter. But the side effect is that directness can sometimes feel like aggression. Just today I was speaking with a couple of new people on my team, and I noticed they kept adding my name to the end of every message. Thanks, Michael. I'll try that, Michael. I'll ask Esther about that later, Michael. Very polite, of course, but after a while the name starts to feel like an extra appendage hanging off each sentence. In Spanish, there's the word confianza, which roughly means confidence or trust. Ironically, it is often used to excuse an insult. Confianza, no? But in this case, I mean it sincerely. I want people on my team to have enough confianza to know that we are fine even when we drop a few niceties. 5 years ago, I would have just said, we can kill the Michaels at the end of your messages, but thanks for being polite. Today, more explanation is needed, or I'll be called in by HR.
So what's interesting is that we don't have to choose. We can just have all these different tools in our toolbox. But
that's what I've learned, I think, with time. Right.
Tell me more about that.
Because I've been in other companies, right? After that, I worked for Vestas Offshore, MHI Vestas Offshore. The MHI is Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is a Japanese company. And that culture is completely different. And I think I saw a different way of communicating there, and a way of getting decisions made that was not as direct, not as commanding as I was used to. So that was a very interesting experience. I enjoyed being part of that company a lot because it was different and it was a great experience in many ways, but also because of seeing a different leadership style being practiced.
It requires a completely different sensitivity, doesn't it?
Right, it does. And then in that case, we were also part of a culture clash, you could say, with a Danish machine manufacturing company meeting a Japanese candid. The odd thing is that I actually at times felt more akin to the Japanese colleagues that I had that came from this very large company like Maersk is, than the Danish people who came out of the Vestas organization.
What drew you to the Japanese?
Many, many things, but the level of technical expertise was just completely astounding. And the calm but still firm approach to things was just so interesting. I didn't have a lot of experience with Japanese colleagues from Maersk. Maersk was present in Japan, but I didn't have a lot of experience. I had a lot of experience with other Asian cultures, but not the Japanese so much. So I actually didn't really know what I was getting into. Being so utterly serious about what you do and just relentlessly trying to improve on everything that they dealt with was just amazing for me to see up front. I knew about it from the outside and so on, but seeing the results of what you can achieve if you just improve a little bit every day and you're very deliberate and serious about it, that's just crazy.
And Martin is very deliberate about it. I like that word because hiring is one of those places where speed can make you look decisive right up until it makes you expensive. He is not saying make it complicated. He is saying slow down enough to understand who is actually sitting across from you.
And also, actually, what was interesting was that the reason that joint venture ever happened was that MHI, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, didn't find success in offshore wind on their own. And for Japanese people, organizations to sort of fail in that kind of enterprise and then not just abandon it, but looking around, asking themselves, who is actually very good at this? We need to find the people who can do this and learn from them. And that's exactly what they did, which was also kind of, okay, you're used to whatever you touch, at least over time, you become the world's best at it. Right? And then you find an area here where you don't find success. And what is your reaction? It's to go out and find the people who actually have had success and learn from them and cooperate with them. That I thought was utterly amazing. And they're just hilarious people to be around. I mean, drinking with Japanese people in Tokyo, it's some of the funniest experience that I've ever had. So there's that too. Great colleagues, and yeah.
So on the one hand, you're talking about how serious they are and how motivated and how Kaizen is such an important part of their lives.
Indeed.
And then on the other hand, they can relax.
But that's the funny thing, right? That's so great. I mean, if you want to see what alcohol intolerance looks like in real life, you just go drink with some Japanese colleagues. It's so much fun. And because we Danes, we come from a completely different culture, right, where we have pretty solid alcohol tolerance, the most of us, and it's but being able to have fun with colleagues like that is just priceless to me.
Well, Martin, being that it is Friday, it is 4:30. I think this is an opportune time to say thank you very much for sharing your story with us today, which is fascinating, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
You're very welcome. I think it's a great project you have going here, and I can't wait to hear what comes out of it.
I want to thank Martin for being so honest about a situation that most leaders remember very clearly, but rarely describe in much detail. The first time you fire someone stays with you, especially when the decision is right and still difficult. Martin gives us a useful reminder that leadership is sometimes empathy, sometimes patience, and sometimes the willingness to stop waiting for a situation to become less obvious. Thanks to my guest and to all of our loyal listeners. Subscribe today so you don't miss upcoming conversations. And if you found this podcast valuable, please leave a review. It helps others discover the show and keeps the dialogue growing. For more information about Scale U and Scale U retreats, go to scaleu.org, where you can find the full library of podcasts, blogs, and additional resources. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye.